generative AI, Gen AI or generative AI is a school of technologies, more popularly also called GPT, right? Now, generative AI, as the name suggests, is an AI that can generate content. It can generate an output based on an input, right?
Right.
It's different from the traditional AI sets, because traditional AI is a very specific and task focused. Generative AI is a little larger, especially because the modern generative AI systems sit on large language models, which have been trained on billions and billions of data points from the internet. I've lost count as to what the latest training models are trained on. But I think up to 3.5 was about 175 billion models. Then it came to like 3 trillion models. I don't even know where they're getting such exponential growth in the training data from. But that, again, we'll talk about that being an issue later on as well. But yes, that's what it does. It's learned or a whole bunch of language in different contexts and essentially assigned a score to everything. What that basically means is it doesn't know anything on its own. Even when you implement generative AI, it doesn't know anything on its own, but it can predict the next word which makes the most sense, or the next output which makes the most sense in the context that you are in. So that's the absolute fundamental layman explanation for generative AI. I hope that made some sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think even in the parlance of intelligence, there are different ways of defining intelligence. Creativity kind of becomes a slightly higher intelligence, and now that we're creating content using Gen AI, hence I think there is a natural correlation to the fact that it is a very intelligent tool or technology that we've got hands on. To be very honest, Nikhil, May 2022, when the whole chat GPT exploded into our world, I think I don't think I'm the only one who thought that this is going to change the world to another level, right? 2 years down the line, I see generative AI being picked up. Of course, there are multiple use cases that we're seeing, but at the same time, we are also seeing it happening in pockets. We are also seeing it happening in very specific kind of use cases, right? So your thoughts on why do you think it is, one, it is restricted, secondly, why we are not scaling to the extent that we thought the kind of impact that this particular technology would bring onto the industry?
Right. So the expectation was that this kind of technology would sort of do away with a lot of the boring work. All the grunt work will go away because now it has learned and you can train it more and it will predict the next thing that's coming.
Right.
But the challenge has been that people aren't using it for that. They're not using it for the boring stuff. They're not using it as much to become more productive. They're using the technology to actually have more creative outputs. That said, there are use cases in the productivity space. That's sort of where my bread and butter lies. But largely because there's so many open source solutions that are built on top of existing LLMs, well, not open source per se, but there are a lot of solutions that have been built on top of LLMs, which are very focused towards the media content. So in essence, if you have to sort of classify an adoption funnel for generative AI, it falls into 3 or 4 buckets, right? One is your content creation. This is actually where we're seeing the most. This is not for specialized content creation for companies, where companies say, "Oh, this generative AI is the tool we're using to create all content." It is individuals within the companies who are using generative AI and open source generative AI to input information, quite often we found to be private company information, to the public platform, and getting an output to get a more specific outcome for, say, drafting letters or drafting more specific ideas, and using those in presentations. I myself have done that, except I didn't use client names, or I don't think I did. But it becomes that's one of the big use cases. Another big one is around creativity, right? That, like I spoke about, people are using it in the creative pursuits. I've heard so many times on some Gen AI groups that I'm part of that I wish people were using Gen AI to solve to wash my clothes, not make my paintings.
And do my laundry,
yeah. So do my laundry, not
I have the bandwidth to do the more creative job, but here it's
exactly
just the opposite. Yeah, I'm sure there is a meme which is making rounds in the circles. Yes, I've seen.
Exactly. So, and I'm pretty certain there's a Reddit group around this as well, which I'm going to follow soon.
Okay.
So, the creative elements are taking a big bandwidth from what Gen AI can do. The
Right.
third and fourth bucket are actually more industry focused, which I think it's more exciting. One is the scalability element, especially around customer servicing,
Mhm.
the chatbots. The reason
Right.
why this is exciting is because chatbots already existed for a long time. They've been there in the industry for over a decade,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, right.
Or at least a decade. So when generative AI came, they just changed the backend technology to service it. But the problem is people were a little too zealous in um, adopting that tech without putting guardrails around it. Again, we'll talk about those in
Yes,
challenges in
absolutely.
adoption,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's something which people have been struggling with. That you add generative AI, but then what happens to the back end? But what happens when it starts hallucinating or starts promising customers things they should not be promising? What's the liability around it? It
Right.
is a whole web of issues which we haven't been able to figure out, but we're getting there, and there are some ways to counter these issues.
Correct.
And finally, you have the productivity side of things. Actually,
Mhm.
fitting Gen AI within your workflows. A classical example is Copilot. Now, Microsoft, we know, well, Copilot's been very successful with for developers for writing code, which is one of the primary use cases of why people are using it. It's
Mhm.
also been very successful when marketing folks are actually using specialized tools to create the marketing strategies and use now adopting other AIs along with Gen AI to
Correct.
to market to specialized channels, but it's still not picked up with the everyday folk for your everyday work. That's what we're trying to get at, where the mundane, drudgerous work that you're doing, that should be done by generative AI.
Yeah, yeah. I think just to add to one of the points, Nikhil, that we just mentioned, that industry specific use cases where we are seeing that there is the traction is somehow limited, simply because I think the dependency is more on the large language models, which
Mhm.
have data which is very generic data, right? It does not
Yeah,
focus on an
yeah,
industry specific thing, and there is a need for us to move from the large LLMs to maybe smaller language models which are industry specific and hence will be much more accurate. I think
yeah.
that shift is also something that we've seen we should be pushing to for a lot of our enterprise clients. Yes, we
Mhm.
shall eventually talk about it in possibly in a little more detail in our next question. Yes, point taken. These are the four things that we've seen, Nikhil. Having said that, could you possibly talk about some of the technological challenges or technical challenges that we're seeing in
Right.
implementation for use cases which are not in the content creation and not for media and not for customer interactions?
Right. So there are technical challenges are plenty, but depending on the use case, most use cases aren't going very deep into the heavy gen AI, like fine-tuning models or using reinforced feedback and all that. In those situations, what we have seen is model drift is a bit of a problem. What that means is that you spend a lot of time training a model, and there are certain performance indicators which tell you how a model is performing, and then it starts drifting. The
Mhm.
challenge is because you don't know, especially in the case of OpenAI, we don't know how it thinks. We don't really know how the weightages are changing in its responses to what it's giving out. So that context is lost for us to be able to try and solve. That said, there are ways which there's specialized DTSPs that we have in our portfolio that
Mhm.
specialize in doing just this and solving this model drift problem. They have these tools to actually monitor where a model is drifting. Uh, Quite often, the drift happens, or at least hypothesized why drift happens, is through biases. They'll relook at the data set of training and see if we can actually um, change the context a little bit and sort of evade the model drift as much as possible.
Right.
But it is a challenge which there's no conclusive solution to one.
Right.
Another issue that we're finding, and this is the more glaring issue when generative AI is being used in more public areas like the governments or the legal spaces, is hallucination. Last year, I believe there was a situation where I believe a lawyer from Ohio had submitted a petition which had precedences which were not there or had cited clauses which didn't exist. So I guess generative AI doesn't like a black hole, and it just starts filling in information. And keep in mind, it doesn't know what it is saying. It is not intelligence. It is only predicting the next word, right? Just understanding this fundamental thing is really, really essential. This wonder of technology, but it doesn't get you a final output as correctly. So it can hallucinate, especially when it comes to bad data, right? So there are tons of studies done around not just for generative AI, even for other machine learning algorithms or tools which are there for recruiting, which have got a bias in it from previous trained data, which we've seen across the US.
Right.
I don't know if there are enough studies done in India for it, but I'm certain there'd be bias in there as well.
True.
We have to identify those biases and try and solve for them.
True.
So these are some of the biggest technical challenges.
Right.
If I can bridge the technical challenges, another form of challenge that we see is the cost challenge. The expectations from generative AI is that, oh, it's $20 a month.
Yes, Nikhil, do hold on to that thought. We will come
Yeah.
to that. I mean, when we
Okay.
talk about
Sure.
the operational issues, on very
Sure.
specifically talking about the enterprises and how or what is the behavior pattern that we've seen in mid-segment or large segment enterprises to that effect, who want to adopt the AI, who want to be on the AI bandwagon. And yet, when it comes to expectations from the implementations, that's where there is a slight gap. We'll, of course, come to that, Nikhil, very soon. So, technical challenges, yes, I think, like you rightly said, the Gen AI doesn't like black holes, right? And I think the other concern that we have is how confidently it gives out information, which kind of essentially makes it very, very difficult to understand that, listen, Gen AI doesn't really have enough data here and it is hallucinating. So that kind of, and I think one concern that I've been having whenever we talk about implementation of Gen AI is, are the end users or are the decision makers who are trying to set these platforms up, do they even understand, do they have the capabilities of testing out the models, secondly the effort and the training that needs to go in, and the efficacy of what is being given out as an output? Because testing of models and testing of the data and all of this is another very important area, which I think is being very, very blatantly, should I say, underplayed when we are talking about Gen AI implementations being done.
Right. So this is where the expectation management actually comes in.
Absolutely.
So whenever we speak to our clients, we flat out tell them, you know what, we're going to aim for a 80% or a 90% output.
Sure.
You will not get it at the end of the POC. We are going to need constant feedback from you or constant training from you to get it, right? It's not always going to be very easy for everyone to understand this, but I believe leadership understands it. Where this sometimes fails is the sentiment being trickled down to the people who are actually going to be affected by it. And you can't blame them. There are 1,000 things to do, and there's this extra thing coming to them. So where the paradigm gets
Exactly.
lost.
I mean, think about it. Prior to this, probably the kind of software implementations we've seen, let's take an example of an ERP system or a CRM system, wherein, I tell the system what I need, and with a couple of clicks and couple of installation changes, we do have something that we can use and which is pretty contextualized to our needs, right? So here and I think that fundamental understanding that this is something very different, and a model which needs to be trained and a model which needs to be worked upon with feedback. I think that is something that that is a fundamental shift that we're still trying to make it a little more prevalent in our enterprise clients, right?
It absolutely is. And this has to be called out in every SOW that you write, every expectation setting that's having, every time you're managing a client, that it is not going to give you an end result. Your team will have to dedicate this time. Where this is very challenging for people is to wrap their brains around the fact that, you know what, this thing is supposed to make my job easier. Why do I have to do extra work to make my job easier?
Right.
It's a long-term play. So this paradigm is there is a some model of a hill there somewhere where we have to which will sort of help define what is the extra effort required to train, to give feedback, for whether it's a RAG system or a fine-tune system, to be effective enough to give us usable output, right? The thing is, once that is done, then increasing the context to more things in the same domain will give you a better result as well. But you need to have that training in the first place. You have to put in the time, and not just for the application development, but to ensure that the output is good enough.
Okay. I think, yes, rightly said, Nikhil. Somewhere there's a feeling that there is a good amount of overestimation on what Gen AI or AI in general can do,
Yeah,
and a gross underestimation of the effort that goes to bring AI to that point. I think
right.
that mismatch is something that we've definitely seen and we've spoken about, and we are actively working on it.
Right.
Yes, sounds good. So, Nikhil, I mean, just a couple of minutes ago, you did touch upon a point wherein, where Gen AI is being used rapidly by individuals in an organization, wherein they're putting in organization-specific data and asking for, refinement, let's say an email to be written, or, uh, uh, a paragraph to be drafted out, and so on and so forth, not realizing that this is company data which is going out in the open, which is going to be
Yeah,
used by OpenAI, right?
yeah.
OpenAI with the LLMs. How do you think, talk a little about that? Because I do know of course, there is a lot of talk happening about responsible AI, ethical AI, while we talk about biases in the models and so on and so forth. Uh, Maybe break it down in a little more nuances as to what are these ethics and what are these concerns that we are having, the biases that we're seeing in the model trainings.
Right. So there are a few elements to this. Let's talk about the most fundamental one, like the case you brought up, where somebody is using internal data directly, like client names, direct numbers. I've known somebody who put their own Aadhaar card number on generative AI to see if it can read the data. It's probably not the best thing to do, but people do it. Now, in event that you want to do something like this, or you have to use it, mask the data as much as possible. Use something else to solve problem. I find that to be one effective way of sort of supplanting it. But this is literally the baseline. When you talk about the ethics of the solution, it becomes a policy based thing itself. Now, let's say talk about the technology policy here, right? The simplest strategy is actually building the LLM into you can take an LLM from outside within the closed environment where you have your own AWS environment, which is secure and safe, right? So the information is not going out in large streams, that is going down bit by bit, and you're keeping the confidentiality of the complete information that is there. That's the biggest concern that anyone would have. The other, which is another set of use cases we are seeing, this is typically for company where data privacy is extremely important. It is so important that it is life or death, or it is the IP. It can shut down the company if information goes out. In those situations, we found companies want their own in-house LLM, right? In which case they want a whole LLM environment within their own servers and running everything from their own from their environment, right? One of the easiest way to prototype this would be with something like Hugging Face as a good place to test things out, but it's not the only one. There are quite a few ways to do this, and we now. Network Science has companies within the portfolio to help manage the machine learning operations for this. The ML ops specialists who will ensure that your latency is at a minimum and your response times are extremely strong for the generative AI use cases in this case. So these are a couple of ways to ensure that your information remains secure, your information is not going out, but it leads to but there are many other ethical challenges and rather legal challenges that you're still stuck with, which are more regulatory in nature, right? And those are things which even companies don't know anything about because I believe that even the governments don't really know how to
Correct.
solve those problems, right?
Absolutely.
Um, I think beginning of December, we saw Europe launch the
You,
AI Act.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
I think US is talking about a new AI Act.
correct.
There
India
are
is also, I think India has also brought out a draft and is asking for feedback from all the AI practitioners.
it
Yes,
it
but
has and the first draft I believe which India came out was in fact was rejected very outrightly. So
absolutely
yeah, but I'm glad that they're following the process of is this a good policy, and then
correct.
people
Absolutely.
giving the feedback. I think that's a good thing. But
I
whatever
think
my thoughts
true,
again on the draft uh,
true, true.
notwithstanding. Uh,
Right.
but this is it's really interesting because the new AI acts are sort of going to now define how companies adopt LLMs a little bit. Not in terms of, oh, we'll use this strategy or that'll still be their own, but the guardrails around what they can't do. That actually creates a big limiter, right? Now let's talk about D2C companies, companies that directly, like really large D2C companies, right?
Mhm.
Any company which has, which wants to identify its customers straight from their own image. They walk in and they know they want a seamless customer experience.
Right.
It's well and good to say that this is great, but what if the AI Act says you can't do facial recognition,
Absolutely. Without
right?
consent. I guess that's the
Without
consent
consent.
part of it becomes extremely important there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What if companies can't use facial recognition to determine whether their workers are working or not? I know many companies actually use that method as well, or to see they track the mouse of the workers, or to see how well they're working, or
Mhm.
are they working at all, or what they're doing. So there are a lot of ethical issues which these policy guys would have to figure out. A big one which I read about only recently, and I don't have an answer to this, is whether AI should be used for college admissions. Forget recruitment, but college admissions are a really big thing, because first barrier is, should the AI be trained on past data? Because if it's trained on past data, there's a very clear bias towards one community versus the other, but to the more well off, especially in India. Then, if it's going to be not college admissions, job interviews, should AI be used for job interviews? There are already so many people in job interviews. What is the entry criteria for the job interviews? Ultimately, these ethical challenges are getting us to question the most fundamental structures of our society and how we live every day. But that's something, it's for better minds than me to answer right now.
Absolutely. True. Very true, Nikhil. So while Nikhil, we spoke about the technical challenges, we did speak about the operational challenges also in the implementation
Yeah.
of Gen AI. We kind of touched upon the ethical, or let's say responsible AI, which we
Mhm.
do agree to that ethics and intent is something that we can't really pinpoint. But yes, we can make it more responsible by transparency. We can also make it more responsible by following certain regulations which we're seeing across the globe. May not necessarily be by in our own geography, but yes, they are kind of guiding principles for us even today before we actually jump into something of our own. At this, while we're talking about these challenges, I also want to quickly touch upon what we just spoke about a few seconds ago about the attitude of the or rather the behavioral patterns that we're seeing in enterprises who want to jump onto the Gen
Right.
AI bandwagon. Uh,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a big question. That's a question that I deal with on a daily basis, right? So it all goes back to our fundamental institutional structures.
Okay.
N- Now, there are companies who have the ability to adopt technologies really quickly. They
Mhm.
tend to be the ones who are building the tech themselves, or they have very strong innovation flows to access it from outside. But even then, there's a lot of guardrails. The moment it's not being built within your organization, there's going to be a lot of guardrails. For companies who are not used to the technical evolution that is happening, it's even worse. So, say, for instance, the professional services industry or the healthcare industry, the guardrails for what you can bring in are so much higher, and those are built internally. What that means is companies want to de-risk themselves. The apprehension is there by design. Uncertainty for what is going to happen next is there by design and adoption of those solutions. So that is a challenge that we do face. But that doesn't mean that companies themselves are wrong in putting those challenges. It is good to be a little apprehensive about something that you're not that you haven't experienced in the past, and you're seeing others talk about it, but do you really know about it? Right?
True.
It's a really important piece. So that's something which we are facing, and the way it represents itself to us is in terms of apprehension and shelling out too much money right at the beginning, um, uh, tempering their expectations from what this will really do from a cost perspective to what it will implement if they put a little bit more. When can they see certain outcomes? I want an application one every month. It's not going to work like you can end up with that strategy, but you have to plan that in advance. You're not going to have, oh, I'm going to start now and have one by the end of the month. It's not always that simple. Some trainings can take longer, but then there's a feedback that needs to be given every time you have an SWW. Your baseline has to be that you have to train the application, you have to give it feedback, And then once it goes into production, there's a AWS cost and then a SaaS cost that comes in. And then you have to train the application to with your folks, as we talked about, why would they spend extra time into this just before?
Yeah.
So the whole system is built to de-risk. I understand why. I'm not saying we should change that very drastically, but there we have to move from a crawl strategy to at least a walk strategy somewhere. And that is where that's when you'll actually start seeing real impact of AI. So we did a lot of numerical analysis around this, around actual costing and the benefit. We found for a couple of our clients whom we did this analysis for, the short-term benefit to an ROI was 50%. As in, you would get only 50 cents on the dollar for what money that you get for a 6-month period or 1-year period. But within 12 to 14 months, most of them broke even. But within a 3-year period, they had reached an ROI, a cumulative ROI of 5x and 7x. Right? So the return investment is that much stronger if there's just a little bit more aggression in the way we take it. But yes, there are internal stakeholders. Like I said, these the resistance to change is there by design and for good reason. But maybe a little bit more hope, moving with a little more hope and trust would actually take them quite far.
True. Yes, yes, Nikhil. I think that also this classically also talks about the behavior pattern that we see in deep tech in general, right? I mean, deep tech is we've seen solutions being built over the period of a decade. I mean, 5 years, 10 years. It's not like your traditional IT wherein there are certain tweaks done and we have a new product. I think that's by default the nature of deep tech that we've been seeing in our industry, right? The gestation period is a substantial gestation period, and it is about holding on to and putting in the right effort during the milestones and during the journey, so that we reach to this 3x and kind of a ROI that we're seeing. Yes,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. I think that's a conversation that we have to be completely focused on, saying that we cannot have a Gen AI implementation which is full-fledged in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It does need its own time and maturity. Right.
So to add to that, what you're basically doing is sacrificing your outcome for speed. You're sacrificing. I need this application up, and I want to done it fast. I want it done fast. It reduces your output. It reduces the quality of what you're getting. You give it a bit more time, include the training time in the POC. You will have a better output. You will have a stronger output. And those are things you definitely need to factor in.
Absolutely. While we do attribute AI to do things faster and easier for us, I think that expectation has to shift from during the development to post-development. That's a little shift of understanding that we definitely should look at.
Absolutely.
Yes, Nikhil. Nikhil, coming back to the point, we've of course been talking about the challenges that we've seen in the Gen AI implementations. And I do know, like we discussed, right, there are at least a couple of, at least 5 different Gen AI pilots implementations that you're doing across multiple industries, be it service industry, be it industries which are involved in manufacturing or involved in healthcare and so on. Give us call out what are you doing differently so that these implementations are more effective and we are able to steer them to the right kind of outcomes that we want.
Right. So we have a 4.5-step process is what I would call it. And there's a reason why I call it a half-step, right? Okay. And this is not just for Gen AI. It is actually for everything that network science does. It just so happens that it lends itself to a successful Gen AI implementation really, really well. We start with the expectation setting. Every expectation is perfectly transparent. We let the client know what we will achieve right at the beginning, right off the bat. We don't promise the client we'll hit 95%. We don't promise the client we'll hit 99%. But the first pass, you might get a 30% or 40%. If it's really successful, you get a 60%. That's the first pass. But that doesn't mean that it won't hit 80 or 90%.
Correct.
Right. We also set the expectation. We try and educate the client as much as possible about how generative AI thinks. So they actually understand that they're not going to hit 100%. it's really going to be hard to hit 100%. What you can do is actually set an expectation that, you know what, the more you train, the more effort you put, the better it is going to be, and we will handhold you in that effort. We will not just project management you do the project management, we will do a project governance of your full execution, which takes me to the second point, is the governance layer that we put in place. We have templatized our governance process to the T, where every step of the way is followed from a timeline perspective and and an SOW perspective. If a change happens, yes, it can happen, but we make sure that the client is informed at every step of the way of any change in timeline. And this is when network science actually does one thing very, very different. We take accountability of outcome. We ensure we put our names on the thing that you will achieve the outcome that we have set out to achieve. Right. So we are going to be realistic in what we give you, and there will be no as long as there are no drastic changes. We have a limit to what changes we can bring in during the course of development, but we take the accountability of what you'll be getting and what their output is going to be. Right. We hope to be good enough to reach a point that we can take accountability of the business itself. But that will take some time. That will take some time for us to build the confidence in our ability to execute every single thing to the T in every single scenario. So yeah, our partners are some of the best that we found in the industry, and we should be able to get there very, very soon. The third part of this is our reliance on not just our partners, but on a string of advisors and experts whom we actually bring on board, right?
Yeah.
There are specialists.
True.
Now, these specialists are, if you go through our website, you'll be able to see many of them. They are some of the smartest people in the industry for why they are advisors to us, whether it is AI to actually being information specialists or infrastructure specialists or IT specialists. Our own company has people with 15, 20 years experience in IT services and IT sales and solutioning. So when it comes to experts, you yourself amongst them, we have the highest quality that you can actually get in the industry to guide us in that process. So whenever we are executing something, yes, if it's run of the mill, we don't bring them in for that. But whenever there's something slightly unique, we will bring experts in to guide us through a implementation strategy, a product strategy, and a technology strategy. Which takes me to the last part. But not the half, the half that I've spoken about is the strategic focus in implementation. We ideally don't do one-off implementation. We've done that in the past. We do that a little bit, but ideally, our implementations are on a large-scale strategy focus. Right? We build an AI strategy for companies which we want to implement this for. We start up with a preliminary strategy, and then through an AI 101 workshop with the leadership, we build a much longer, robust strategy along a maturity index designed specifically for that company. And so where does the company want to be in 2 years? How does the company remain competitive in a changing environment? We use that maturity as a guiding light to build our set of solutions over a period of 6 months, 1 year to 18 months. And there's obviously a constant review process and all that, but that strategy actually helps us in a lot of the implementations that we take on forward. And everything is very, very measurable. Everything is a KPI-driven implementation.
Yeah.
And the last thing we talk about is a co-create model. We don't go in with just, I'm going to come and implement and leave. It's very, very, very rare that happens. We want the companies whom we're building for involved, especially in generative AI implementation. That is absolutely essential because they're the ones who are subject matter experts. They have to give us the feedback on how on improving the platform. So that combined IP that we create is the most essential part of how we de-risk any implementation that we do.
Absolutely. And that just ensures that everybody has a skin in the game, not right from the our portfolio partners to ourselves and to the end users who are going to be actually benefiting from the solutions that we're building for them. Sounds yes. I mean that was a beautiful summation, Nikhil, for all of that, all of the challenges that we spoke about. And I think one special mention that I definitely would want to make about the core the kind of harmony we've been able to build between the experts in the industry, I mean, experts from the academic area, or from people who've actually worked on AI, and here and getting them work harmoniously with the solution partners who are actually trying to commercialize AI and create platforms and solutions. I think because there's always a chance of they missing out on the key aspects which were, which have to be taken into consideration. I think that's something like a very, according to me, that's a big plus that we bring onto the table every time. So yes, sounds absolutely great. So Nikhil, I do have a couple of questions coming in from our participants. Let me just take a quick look, and maybe if we can, we do have 5 or 10 odd minutes with us. So let me quickly go through this. So there's a very interesting question that I have from Amrish, which is about, with the advent of so many different LLMs, how does one decide which generative AI model is best suited for one's need?
Interesting. So that is quite often becomes a very contentious thing, if I'm being honest. Though on many parameters, the best performing ones currently are Llama. The Llama 2 model that has come out is really, really good. Then OpenAI, the latest version is always going to be very good. It's always being trained. It's the earliest one, so it's been trained really, really well. It's got some of the brightest minds in generative AI in the world around it. So OpenAI, so ChatGPT, that is. And finally, my personal favorite is Claude. Whenever it comes to textual information, Claude 2 gives you really good output. Very deep, well thought out, stretched out information. I think that's really, really, it's a fantastic platform.
Right. But I think, yes, Nikhil, like you rightly pointed out, it is a very contextual decision that needs to be made.
Right.
Very, again, going very specifically to regional nuances, or nuances, culture dependent nuances, where in that case, there may not be a requirement of an LLM. We can look at smaller language models. Like, for example, if I'm looking at a very, very industry specific output, which has to be trained on the data, or that the language, or the taxonomy of that particular that particular industry. And that's where, for all we know, we say we don't even need an LLM, right? A small language model is sufficient, and that is going to be so much more accurate. So yes, rightly said, it is a very contextual question, depends on the use case that we're talking about, and of course multiple other pointers to that. And I think in that case, again, we are also, I think I'm very happy to say that we also bring in those capabilities wherein, if there is a requirement of using open source large language models or small language models, the optimization of that, because they are open source, is also something that we've managed to, we have some amazing partners who can help us do that. So I think that is also another way of looking at it. So yes, to Amrish, I think, I hope you've got that answer. So let's it's a very contextual thing, and let's look at the specific use cases and then decide how these LLMs, which of them is the most suited one. A couple of the other question essentially that I can see here is, with GenAI being so popular in the student group, how do you think it will impact and alter the learning capabilities?
So this is going to be very interesting. I was just talking to one of our clients a couple of days back that the people are going to hire now, AI is going to be an expectation. It's not going to be an add-on. Because the final years of everybody who's coming out of college, they've all used generative AI to submit their assignments because colleges did not know how to handle that. So yes, it's generative AI is going to be very, very popular in the newer group of people who is entering the workforce. It is such a powerful tool. It is such an enabler. So if you accept that mindset that the next generation is going to be empowered by it rather than handicapped by it, there is a lot of value that you can get. So it's going to impact your work in that it's going to make your work more efficient for sure. It is going to change the hierarchy of what you think people will be doing. So earlier, for instance, junior engineers would just be writing the really long drudgery of the code. That's not going to be the case anymore. You're going to have them actually, just using Copilot to quickly generate the code. So you can, so the complexity of decision making is going to start shifting down a hierarchy. Right. So what the lead engineers would be doing will start moving down a little bit to managers. What managers will be doing will start going down a little bit as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think very specific to the way our learning capabilities are getting modified. I think we more the thought process is slightly shifting to the fact that where earlier it was memory, and wherein the dependence was on memory and the dependence was on, replaying what we've known or what we've done. I think there is a large amount of a shift which is happening to question how, and how can I do this differently, because we have somebody who's going to give us a straightforward answer, but asking the right question is what matters now, right, when it comes to uh, generative AI, or for that matter any other insight AI that we're talking about.
Absolutely, which is why education around how to use generative AI is really, really essential. Knowing that it's not going to give you a 100% answer, knowing to fact check every output. You
Yes.
cannot use an output of a generative AI as gospel. You have to fact check everything that's coming out. It's very, very essential. And this will all come with some amount of education, some amount of experience. Allowing people to build that experience will give you a really strong workforce, and very creative workforce in the future.
Right. I think, Nikhil, we have last 1 minute. So
Yeah.
this is one very interesting question that I think we should tackle. We should just touch it before we leave. What is the best approach to mitigate the general suspicion of plagiarism looming in the minds of potential adopters?
Right. So this is a very, very big question. There
Exactly.
are
Yeah.
debates happening all over the internet around this. Now, I don't have an answer, in all honesty. I don't know whether something, I think it's going to be case by case. To give an example, Grammys have basically made it illegal for a generative AI to write a
Right.
song that I think you can sing, or maybe the other way around. But in one form,
Right.
you can't. Generative AI can't write the song. You have to. A human should have written the song. So I think it's a moral line that you're drawing about what is plagiarism and what is not, what is unique and what is actually human generated content. Because in a way, this all trained on things humans have made in the past,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is a complex conundrum when we don't really know what the right answer for
True.
this is,
Yeah.
right?
And I think
Uh,
the first step towards that should be transparency.
It
Wherever
is. It
yeah.
is. The training data transparency is definitely going to be, and this is where the policy minds of our country. Uh, I hope they are listening, because their inputs are going to help define how we counter this plagiarism, and for good or bad, that's how our society is going to move forward. So I don't think there is going to be a perfect answer for it. There is no right or wrong. There is only gray, and yeah, how we tackle plagiarism is a big one. I do not have a clear answer, unfortunately.
Great. Sounds good. Sounds good, Nikhil. I think we're almost done with our allocated time. Thanks, Nikhil, for calling out the five, what is it, 2.5? What did you say?
Four and
What?
a half, four and
Four
a
and a
half
half. Okay,
steps.
4.5 steps that we did. I would, of course, if any of our participants or anybody wants to know more about the 4.5 steps that we're doing, please feel free to reach out. Happy to get into a conversation. We can see how we can, how we will impact your Gen AI implementations, and how we make them more effective, and how we make them more better. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everybody joining in us. Thanks, Nikhil. Wonderful
Thanks,
speaking to you
Trupti.
as usual.
Pleasure as always.
Yeah. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Thanks.
one.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.